Okay, and we are recording now, so I'm going to go ahead and you know how it goes. I'm going to mute everybody, and if you want to say something, just unmute yourself. But this eliminates a lot of the background noise and so forth. So, all right. Okay, I want to welcome everyone here tonight, April 19th, and we're going to be talking about chapters 21, 22 of the first book of Samuel. And it is beginnings of actually the rest of the book of Samuel is David fleeing from Saul in one regard or another, or some kind of an episode. It's always a cliffhanger with David and what he has to deal with here until Saul actually dies in battle. And so let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Okay, I sometimes hesitate with that blessing because if I haven't eaten supper yet, I'm ready to do a hamotzi instead of the regular blessing here. So I've done that a couple of times. Kind of embarrassing. All right. So here we are with our chronology. You've looked at that 100 times. Today we're going to we're still in this time frame right here. About it's almost it's a 9-year period that David is basically exiled by Saul, and here he is. He knows that God has anointed him to be the king, and yet here he has to wait for it, and just and try not to get killed in the meantime. It's hard to be king when you're dead. So it was a long 9 years for David, and yet some of the most poignant and emotional psalms that we have were written during this time frame where David was really in a bad way. So, so let's remember last week where they had the story of Jonathan and David. They were saying, "Look, David's trying to convince Jonathan that your dad Saul is really trying to kill me," and Jonathan, he wasn't, he just didn't see it that well until then, when King Saul threw a spear at Jonathan and called him an SOB because he was a friend of David's. Jonathan finally got the memo that Saul wanted David dead, and so in that regard, then they finally Jonathan, they devised this way, shooting the arrows and so forth, that told David how that whether or not Saul was really after his head, which David already knew anyway, so it was no big deal. But so we just finished off of that episode, and from there, then we pick up here, and it says David got up and left while Jonathan returned to the town. And that's where they're talking about is that incident there where Jonathan fired the arrows toward David, hiding in the field, and told the young boy to go find his arrows. And the way that he told him let David know that, okay, you got to leave. And so the boy left. David and Jonathan then got together. They said their goodbyes, an emotional, tearful goodbye, because they knew that from then on they would never ever be able to be together again and be buds and so forth. So that's where we're picking up here right now. Then David got up, left, and Jonathan returned to the town. David went to Nobe. I've heard it both ways, but I would say it's probably Nobe. To Ahimelech the Cohen. Now, Ahimelech was he was the high priest. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and read this. David went to Nob to Ahimelech the Cohen. Ahimelech was afraid to meet David. So he said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" David said to Ahimelech the Cohen, "The king has commissioned me with a matter and told me, 'Let no one know anything about the mission on which I am sending you or with what I have commissioned you.' So I have directed the young men and to such and such and a place. And now um, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever can be found." So um, there were 85 priests lived at Nobe, and they served in the tabernacle. And remember, it had been set up. The tabernacle, they had to. I don't know if it was destroyed and had to be rebuilt. The Bible doesn't really tell us. But here's one of those deals that, okay, Carl, last week you asked me, well, where's the ark now? What happened to the ark? Well, the ark is still at Kiriath Jearim, at a priest's home, and it's still there. It's not going to move yet, and so here now they have taken the tabernacle, or what was left of it, or whatever, and they moved it from Shiloh, because we do know through archaeology that Shiloh was definitely burned during this time period, and pretty much leveled. And so they took all of the furnishings and as much as they could of the tabernacle, and really and truly, the way they were, pretty good at taking it up, putting it down, and all that kind of stuff. So they took the tabernacle and they moved it to Nobe, and that's where it had been for quite a while. Enough that 85 priests lived there, and so um, we don't really know. Some people say that maybe the ark had been brought to Nob, but we don't really know at that time whether Saul actually brought it to Nob or not. But it was a village that was located uh, about a mile or two, something like that, northeast of Jerusalem, and near a place called Anathoth. And Ahimelech was the son um, Ahitub, either a brother of Ahijah or Ahiah himself. So all of these names, basically what it amounts to, it makes Ahimelech a great grandson of Eli, or Eli if you're from Texas. Ahimelech and Ahijah were probably maybe equivalent names of the same person. So all that does is kind of give you a genealogy of where this high priest came from, and he was a great grandson of Eli. All right, now you've heard of Matthew Henry, of course, and he commented that the reason that David wanted to go to Nob was that he came there to basically inquire of the Lord, because the high priest was there. The ephod was there with the high priest, with the Urim and Thummim. Those are the two stones that they would that was inside the ephod, and when they'd ask a question of God, they would reach into the ephod and pull one of the stones out, which the stones were exactly the same feel and everything, but one of them was white, one of them was black, and according to some of the sources, and that would tell them either you had to ask a yes or no question. But that was the way that God communicated with the people in many cases. So that that was why he said that's why that David went there, and he had also gone to Samuel, running from Saul, and found out that what, Samuel was pretty much powerless to protect David, and he almost got captured there with Samuel, except for the intervention of God in making all of the um, agents that were sent to the posse that was sent to take David. All of them started prophesying, and just basically they were out of it. They couldn't perform their duties. So Saul himself went, and sure enough, same thing had happened to him. Only the Bible says that to really get his attention and everybody else's attention, he was so under the influence of whatever God put on him that he stripped off his clothes, and he was there a day and a night laying on the ground naked, it says. So, and whether you say naked means outside of his kingly garments, or naked like a jaybird, well, you make up your mind. It really doesn't matter which way you want to read it. But it was a humiliating experience for Saul, and David was able to escape. And so David goes on in this thing, and he talks to the um, he talks to the high priest there, and he tells him, what does he tell him? He tells him a lie. He lied to the high priest. He said, "The king has charged me with this matter, it was just an out and out lie. That's all it was. The Bible records it, and we can't really justify it. We shouldn't, and it's certainly not something that say, well, look, David lied. I can tell a lie once in a while." No, it doesn't quite work that way. And I don't think if you lived your life like that, um, I don't think it would end well for you. So David had some men with him, and so going ahead, any comments or questions on that so far? I don't want to get somebody out of it. Okay. Um, so verses 5 through 9, the Cohen answered David and said, "There is no common bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread. And so long as the young men have kept themselves from women, of course, women have been kept from us, as on previous campaigns," David answered the Cohen. "So the young men's vessels were holy, though it was an ordinary mission. How much more so will their vessels be holy today?" So the Cohen gave him consecrated bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, uh, which was taken out of the from the presence of Adonai, in order to replace it with hot bread on the day it was taken away. So now one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before Adonai. His name was Doeg the Edomite, chief of Saul's shepherds. Then David said to Ahimelech, "Isn't there a spear or a sword on hand? For I did not take my sword or my weapons with me, because the king's mission was so urgent." All right, that's almost kind of a little parenthetical there that um, we don't know. Now I've got, me, I got my maps here, and we start out up here where, here Gibeah, that's where Saul was, and then they went up to Ramah, which was where Samuel was, and then Saul kind of chased him from there. So he came back down through Gibeah, and then he went to Nobe there at number 4. And here, this Kiriath Jearim was where the ark was, and if it was still there, it's only a couple of miles from. Well, it'll be a little bit more than a mile, because this from Nobe to Jerusalem here is about a mile and a half. Okay, if you look at this. In fact, I was just reading today an biblical archaeology something. What is it? Biblical Archaeology Review, I think, or Biblical Archaeology Society, about some of the excavations up there north of Jerusalem, and where they feel like that they'd actually found some stuff that could maybe be identified with the tabernacle being there at Nobe. So kind of interesting stuff. And so anyway, that's where we're at. We're at Nobe right here now, okay? And so whether the ark was at Nobe or not, we don't really know, but it could very well have been there, since they had a tabernacle there. All right. And so he left. Nobe was actually only about a mile and a half away from where David was when he left Jonathan. So, I mean, the distances here are really, really small. And I look at it and, like from our house down to the road where we go out of the ranch, it's a half a mile, and just down the road to get to from our house to the main road out of here is a half a mile, and then you go another mile, we wouldn't even be off the ranch yet where we live, and that that's how far David was from Saul. So it's not a big distance that he was away from him. So that just kind of shows you how that God protected David so often, because there was, the distances between them were not very far away, and so. Yeah, and I had written when I wrote this thing up. The some were saying that the ark was still at Kiryat Yearim, and others saying no, it could have been taken over there. We really don't know. Okay, so David, the high priest, was suspicious of David because here he is traveling alone. Remember, David was one of I mean, he was the most popular of the generals. He was the most successful of any of Saul's generals in terms of, defeating the Philistines. You remember the song that the girls would sing, Saul has killed his thousands and David killed his 10,000s, and so here with a guy like that, a four-star general walking around with no entourage with him, that made the high priest a little bit suspicious, like kind of like when Samuel went into Bethlehem to anoint David, and the officials there at Bethlehem were a little bit nervous, because why is the prophet of Israel coming down here to Bethlehem unannounced, and what did we do wrong? That sort of thing. And so David lied, and then he asked for bread. Now, we don't know how many guys were with David at this time. It doesn't really tell us. Later on, we know that about 400 came to David, but here this might have been just his kind of his close guys, his staff that he had, and so forth. We really don't know. But all right, he asked for 5 loaves of bread. Now, this is stuff coming kind of from Temple Institute and other things like that. These and this is one of the forms that people that they say are the shape of the uh, bread of the faces, the lechem panim, as it were. Okay, that is one of the forms that some people say it was, and there's several different forms that they've done that they say, but we do know that there is when the Bible tells us in let's see, Leviticus 24, the 24th chapter of Leviticus. There, it's up there, five or so, verse 5 or 6, something like that, and it says that they're supposed to take like fine flour, the best flour, and then make 12 cakes out of it. These things of bread here. Oh, you can't see my fingers pointing. These these things here. All right. Um, all right. After 5 years, you'd think I'd get the hang of this. But they had these. They're supposed to make 5 cakes of bread here. Now, and it says that you're making it with 2/10 of an ephah of for each cake. Well, as it turns out, that is about 5 pounds of flour per cake. That is some pretty heavy bread there. Okay, it is heavy. It's dense. If you've ever eaten that stuff that they have in the store, the Elijah bread, that I think what they've done with the Elijah bread, that they've somehow taken cardboard and mushed it all up together and put it in a loaf and sliced it up. And, to me, that's kind of what it tastes like, is just chopped up cardboard. But this stuff would have been very, very heavy. That's, and each one of those would weigh 5 pounds, because it had 5 pounds of flour in it. So when David comes in and he says, "Well, here, give me five loaves of the bread," um, he's talking about 25 pounds of biscuits there that he's going to be carrying off from the high priest, and to feed his men. Now there is some stuff that the writings and so forth from the priests, that from the sages, that say that, after, you remember how this worked, they would bake the bread and put it in the tabernacle, and it would sit there all week long. And the sages tell us that then, when they took the bread um, out of the table there, for because they had baked new bread to put in there, it said that the bread that they took out was still hot and fresh, just like it had been put in there the week before, and it was given to the off-going duty section of priests, and they could eat it as long as they ate it in a holy place. And some of the sages said that there were enough priests that with these 12 loaves here, that they would give them just a small, kind of like, they said the size of a bean is what one of the things that I read, and that they would eat that size, something the size of a bean, and it would totally satisfy them, because the stuff was so special and satisfying to them. So, again, that's the sages. That's what the sages say, but that's extra biblical. It's not in the Bible. And so when I tell you some of those things, I'll try to make sure that I remember. Okay, and there's some, again. If these are priests, guys that are training to be priests in Jerusalem with the Temple Institute, and this is the size of the bread that they're actually making. And you could see how that a piece of bread that big would have 5 pounds of flour in it. I know when we do for the waving of the loaves, and Pat makes up those great big huge challah bread. She doesn't make them in this format here. She makes challah, and so the way that we did that one year, I think that she had 5 pounds of flour, something like that, for 2 loaves, and the 2 loaves were, they were probably 8, 9, 10 inches wide, and about 2 or 3 inches, 3 inches maybe thick, and then about, I think she said 16 or 17 inches long, because that's how long her pan was. And so those are very heavy. And then when you lift them up to wave them for for Shavuot, and I think that's what it was, Shavuot, that you wave the bread offering. They're heavy. They're big. The big things. So these things, that they didn't make these things to wave before the Lord. These were the things that were the bread of the faces, the panim, lechem panim, panim being faces, and then the lechem, of course, being the bread. Okay, but that's what David went away with. I mean, he wasn't going in there and said, "Hey, you got a couple of sandwiches that you can give us?" No, he said, "How about some real bread here?" And the priest then, funny thing, he said, "Well, as long as your men have not been around any women, because if you're around women, then you're ritually unclean," because he figured that, okay, what he's not around women, but it had sexual relations with any women in the past day. And David kind of makes a joke out of it. Actually, he said, "No, we have not kept away from any women. All the women have been keeping away from us." And so, uh, when you read through that, you don't quite get it the first or second or third or 10th time that you read through it. But that's what he was kind of making a joke there that no, we haven't stayed away from any women; they're staying away from us. And the priest said, "Okay, well, good. We can give you some of this bread for your men." And we really don't know. Again, we don't know how many men he had or anything like that. But it said that there was this one guy there that his name was Doeg, the Edomite, and he was the head of Saul's shepherds, and he was there at the tabernacle for some reason. We don't know why. He says he was detained before Adonai. Was he there to offer sacrifices or something? If he was a shepherd, he may have been bringing sheep to the tabernacle for sacrificial reasons and so forth. And but he was there. He watched all of this. And then David said to Ahimelech, he said, "You got any swords or spears or any kind of weapons here at all?" He said, "I had to get out of town pretty quickly here, and so I'm just not, I need a weapon." So he said, "Hey, well, that sword that you took from Goliath. Well, we've got that sword here." And David said, "I'll take it." And so they had the sword that had probably been presented to the Lord, and they wrapped it up as kind of a war prize, I guess, an offering to God. And so then David said he'd take it back. Now, what in the world would David do with the sword of Goliath? I don't know, because if Goliath was actually what they said he was, 9 feet tall, that would have been one mighty big sword, and so probably something that David could not have wielded very handily. But we don't know. Anyway, he took it with him, so I guess it would be better than nothing. And so anyway, that was the story of the bread there. But it was and you can see that's about, those things about 18 inches by 36 inches. Those are big old pieces of bread there. So anyway, going ahead, David in verse 11, David got up and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. But Achish's courtier said, "Isn't this David, uh, king of the land? Isn't he the one that they sang about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s." And so David, he heard this and he says, "Whoa, okay." And he became afraid of King Achish, and he changed his demeanor before him and started acting like a crazy man, a madman, while in their hands, scribbling on the doors of the gate and letting his saliva run down his beard, kind of like foaming at the mouth kind of a thing. And then Achish said to his people in his palace there, his courtiers, said, "Look, you can see that this guy is insane. Why do you bring him to me? Do I have a shortage of crazy people that you here that so you brought me some other crazy fella into me?" Said, "And you're going to bring him into my house?" Basically, he said, "Don't we have enough crazies of our own? We don't need one of those Hebrew crazies. Get rid of him." So David was able to, get out of there because they shoved him out and said, "No, we don't want you, crazy man." And so, again, we don't know where David's his band of merry men were, because they only talked about David being single here, a single-handed thing. Maybe they were just out in the courtyard someplace milling about a little bit. We don't know, but anyway, David left, and then from there he went to um, there's okay, here's the trip to Gath. Okay, I always get behind in my slides here. He went from Nobe over here to Gath. Okay, that's just inside the Philistine territory there. Okay, and so that's where he feigned insanity and the mad dog kind of routine, and they escaped. And then he went to let's see, did I write it down? Yeah, there I did. Okay, he went to Adullam, a bunch of caves. Now, there's a lot of caves in this area. All right, and so here's one, and I looked around at other pictures, and there's just all sorts of ones that said, "Oh, well, this was David's cave at Adullam," and no, this was David's cave, and some of them were these little small things that went off into the ground, limestone type caves. But there were literally in this area there are hundreds of caves. It's just a cave, a place where the limestone was particularly soft. The water would come through, drip through, and dissolve the limestone, and make a cave, like a lot of places that we have here in this country where we have the limestone caves. And but that's where he went. He went and hung out there at okay, here we go, at Adullam. He's back into Hebrew territory here, and in this area. So there it said that David walked from there and he escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and all his father's house heard about it, they went down there to him. Now, anyone who was in distress, anyone in debt, anyone embittered, rallied around him, and he became their leader. There were about 400 men with him. Then David left from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, "Please let my mother and my father and my mother come and stay with you until I know what God will do for me." Then he brought them to the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time David was in the stronghold. But the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold. Depart and go to the land of Judah." So David left, and he went to the forest of Herith. All right, so David went from here in Adullam. His parents came from Bethlehem. Okay, and you see Bethlehem, that's about 10 or 12 miles over here to Adullam. And so his parents would have been oh, at this point they would have been getting on up there in age, because they would have been maybe David was in his 20s at this point, and he was the last one of their kids, so they would have been maybe 30 years 30 40 years older than him. So they could be up at their 50s 60s, that time frame. Okay, so they came down here, and all of his brothers and all of his father's house, they came down there. So evidently they were feeling the heat from Saul. They weren't real sure about what Saul was going to be doing with his intentions toward them. So anyway, they came down here. David packed them all up, and he came down here to Moab. Now, we don't know where Mizpah of Moab is. Okay, that's just speculation as to what what city or town that was, but they do have an idea that's it's Kir Hareseth, but again, speculation. And so he could go down there to the king in Moab. Remember that David's great grandmother, I think his great grandmother, was Ruth, the Moabitess. Okay, and so they had a connection there somehow. And so David is kind of playing the family card there that says, okay, remember my grandmother, great grandmother was from Moab, and so could you kind of you know um, take care of my parents here, let them stay here while I go away and figure out what God is going to do for me. And so evidently the king said, "Yep, okay, we'll take care of them." And Saul was not really, he was not going to go chasing off and trying to get David's parents when they were living in a foreign country. Now that would have been an act of war, and then he would have the Moabites fighting him when he's already, up to his ears in Philistines over on the western front. And so Saul was not going to do that. So they were relatively safe at that point. And then it said David then went to the stronghold. Now, what was the stronghold? Was that Masada that he was at? Masada had been a place that people would go for, centuries. That had been using Masada for a stronghold. We don't know if that's where they were talking about. But that's a picture there of Masada. If you've ever been there, it's quite a quite a place actually. And they don't show it here, but right along on this backside here, that's where the Romans built a huge ramp and put a big siege engine up to it and knocked down the walls, and that's how they were able to get in. But in fact, that big ramp that the Romans built, 2,000 years ago, it's still there today. It has not gone away, hasn't washed away or anything. So that ramp is still there. And and they even down here, they've got a mock-up of the siege engine that the battering ram kind of thing that the Romans had. Interesting place anyway. All right, so David went down there, but then a prophet came to him and said, you got to leave here, David. You got to leave the stronghold, go back into the land of Judah. And so David went to the forest of Herith. And now these are the forest of Herith. Okay, so you can see it's pretty heavily forested. In Louisiana, they would say the trees are pretty thick there. All right, so that's where he went. This area of Herith, just north of Hebron. And that area, as you can see, this is a contemporary picture. This is what it looks like today. All right, so his men, they could very well have been hanging out there, and Saul not be able to find them because they were in this forest. And there might have been some animals that they could shoot and eat off, eat off the land or so forth. So however they did it back in those days. But that's where he went from there. All right, and so if I can catch up. Okay, so then Saul and and this is going into chapter, we're in chapter 22 now, verse 6. It said, then Saul heard that David and the men with him were where David and the men were located. Saul was in Gibeah. That's where his normal place was, sitting under a tamarisk tree on the height up on a hill, spear in his hand. So he carried this spear around all the time. He kind of liked that spear rather than a sword. And all his courtiers were attending him. So Saul said to his courtiers standing about him, listen now, Benjamites. Remember, Saul was a Benjamite. So his people were his own tribe. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you captains or of thousands and captains of hundreds? Yet all of you have conspired against me, and there was nobody disclosing to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in ambush, as is the case today. Of course, that's not really true, because that was Saul's paranoia coming out. Then Doeg the Edomite, who was standing amongst Saul's courtiers, answered and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nobe, to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, And he inquired of Adonai for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent word to summon the Cohen Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and all the Kohanim of his father's house who were in Nobe. They all came to the king. Okay, remember now. All right, so King Saul is right here at Gibeah. Okay, Nobe is right here, a mile and a half away. So it's not like going clear across Israel or something like that. They're just down the road. Send a messenger. Okay, takes them an hour to get there at the most. Walking and so forth wouldn't have taken them very long at all to get there. But we see Saul is in his normal schizophrenic funk here with everybody's against him and all of his people. Nobody will tell him, and is still thinking that his son is the what do you call it, the SOB that he called him before. And so he's just not one that you really wanted to mess with right there. Plus he had his spear in his hand. Now, granted, he hadn't actually no record of him actually killing anybody with that spear, but you never know. So anyway, in verse 12 through 15, it says, "Now listen now, son of Ahitub." Saul said, and "Here I am, my lord," he said. Then Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, by giving him bread and a sword, and by inquiring of God for him, that he should rise up against me by lying in ambush, as is the case today?" Then Ahimelech answered the king, saying, "Who among all your servants is as trusted as David, the king's son-in-law, a captain of the royal guard, and honored in your house? Just today I began to inquire of God for him. Far be it from the king to accuse his servant or anyone in my father's house, for your servant knows nothing of all of this, whether little or much." So here he is. He's telling Saul, said, "Look, David is one of he's a most honored guy. He's your best general. He's most honored. He married your daughter, for goodness sake." And so he comes to me, tells me, he's got this mission. I inquire of the Lord for him. He says, "You think I just did this today?" Uh, I don't know what difference that would have made, whether it was in Saul's mind, it was treason last week or treason this week. But we knew it was a time. There was a time lag there, because David had to go down to Moab and then come back up to the forest of Herith. So there was some time frame, maybe a week or two through here, or maybe longer, because once you get down there to Moab, they Middle Eastern courtesies and so forth might have required them to stick around a while and feast a bit. But anyway, he put up a little defense there, and then going on, but the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." Then the king ordered the guards attending, "Turn around and kill the Kohanim of Adonai, for they are in cahoots with David." I like this translation. It says, "in cahoots with David." "For they knew that he was running away, but did not inform me." But the servants of the king were not willing to raise their hand to assault the Kohanim of Adonai. Remember, these are Benjamites. These are Hebrews, Israelites. And for them to turn and decide, okay, I'm going to kill the priests of the Lord. No, I'm just not going to do it. I can't do it. And so the king said to Doeg, who was not an Israelite, he was a foreigner. And of course, his people with him would have been foreigners. And he says, "Okay, you kill the Kohanim." So Doeg, that didn't make any difference to him. He turned and he killed all of the 85 men who were priests, and excuse me, and Nobe. He went down, a mile and a half away to Nobe, and he struck everybody there with the edge of the sword, men, women. Basically, he killed everybody and everything in Nobe. Now, um, I mean, that's pretty awful. That is absolutely pretty awful. So Saul kind of gets up there and because this would have been hundreds and hundreds of people. So that kind of puts him up there with Herod the Great as far as being a sociopath and just uh, killing his own people. So, despite all that, Nob did not cease to exist. It remained. They killed the priest. So I don't know if when he said he struck the edge of the sword, men, women, and children, infants. Did he just this was a city of priests, so did he just take it out on the priests, the population who were priests or something? Maybe so, but regardless, it just said that he struck down men, women, children, infants, everything, oxen, asses, and sheep with the edge of the sword. Nob did remain intact for hundreds of years. Isaiah mentions it in a description of a journey that King Ashur of Assyria made in 701 BCE when he attempted to conquer Jerusalem. And then Nob was also referred to as the last city the Assyrian army passed through on the way to Jerusalem. And in Isaiah 10:32, it says, "This very day shall he halt at Nob, shaking his hand at the mount of the daughter of Jerusalem, the hill of Jerusalem." And actually, you can, if you stand at Nob, you can look over and see Jerusalem from there. And then again. Nobe is mentioned again in Nehemiah's description of the return to Zion as one of the settlements in the region of Benjamin. So, going ahead, and then with the last verses here, Samuel in verses 20 to 23 says, "Yet one of the sons of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to David. Abiathar told David that Saul had slain Adonai's Kohanim. Then David said to Abiathar, I knew that on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, and I have brought about the death of all the people of your father's house. Stay with me and fear not, for the one who is seeking my life is seeking your life too. But with me you will be safe." So David, basically he blamed himself for this. He said, "Look, I saw Doeg standing over there, and I knew it was trouble. But what could he have done? Was he going to just go over there and kill Doeg just cause? No, David wasn't particularly that kind of guy at this point in life, and so sure enough, it became a case of genocide on the part of Saul. Because he was just kind of crazy anyway. Anything and everything that he thought that was going to take away his throne, and basically he had rejected God's judgment and was doing anything and everything that he could to stop David from taking away his throne and him being able to pass it on to Jonathan. And so he was still trying to desperately, bitterly hanging on to all of this, rather than just admitting that, okay, that God is going. When I die, that's the end of my kingship, and David will take over. Somebody else will take over. I'm not sure he knew that it was David at that point. Maybe he did. So anyway, that closes out the two chapters that we talked about tonight. I hope that there's some stuff that you might have learned, and so Are there any questions now on the record? That's while I still have the recording going, that someone might want to ask, and then if not, we'll turn the recording off, and then we can just open line Sunday here, and you can ask anything else. Any comments or questions about the lesson tonight?
Yeah, I would just want to say that this must have really, really put a damper on the spirituality of the Israelites at this time. Now you've lost, I assume this, now if you're talking about the whole of Nobe, how many priests total are there? I'm thinking this is one, there's 24 orders. And so is this one order or is this like all of them? But you can see either way, it's going to really, really dampen the shall we say, the whole religion of the whole land for a long time to try to replenish this whole priesthood.
Well, you remember the Bible said that there were 85 priests there in Nobe. And so I would assume that they would have been priests from all four orders of the Levitical orders. And so yeah, they killed all of them. So there's basically 20 in each group or so, depending on how they were divided up. But what would have happened then? They would have had to bring in priests from other areas. Now, it would have been very difficult because they would have had to try to trace the lineage to find out, okay, now how do we get a successor for Ahimelech, because he would have to be someone in the lineage of Aaron and not of the other three families of the Levites, because that's what God had said, that the high priest and the actual Cohen, the priests, had to come from the lineage of Aaron and not from the others. Now, there's another way of looking at this. It could have been that there were 85 people there from the lineage of Aaron himself, and then all of the other three families that are part of the Levite clan, they were separate and above that. So we really don't know. We just know the number that God had, what it was recorded here in the Bible, and I think there were. I don't know where I know that there were 85 priests serving in the in Nobe, and so they could have been the entire Levitical clan, a group of them that were on duty other than the high priest, who was always on duty, or it could have been. But yeah, and tell you what, it did for Saul. The rest of the people from then on, they looked at Saul as, this is one crazy dude, and we're just going to have to somehow, some way, we have got to just weather the storm, because God made him king, but he ain't taking him out yet. And so we're just going to have to weather this storm. But he lost it all. He lost a lot of support from the people when he killed the priests, because that's just something that you don't do. I mean, he jumped the shark on that one, that's for sure. And the Bible doesn't really tell us how they replenished that, but I'm sure they did very quickly, because they would have wanted to keep the sacrifices going and so forth.